Today's headlines: surprise as the UK falls back into recession, shock as the government budget deficit widens, and disbelief as Theresa May announces GCHQ will not have the ability to monitor emails in real time. Hello, it's Wednesday the 25th of April. I'm Malcolm Massey and welcome to the New Look UK column news. The UK economy is back in recession, according to official figures. Although the figures are worse than many expected, it is important to point out that they will come as no surprise to the viewers of this programme. The UK has been bumping along the bottom on its way to the next cliff edge since 2007. It is clearly not good news. The missing link in the economy has been confidence, was the idiotic statement from Graham Leach, chief economist of Institute of Directors. In fact, the missing link in the economy is any rational policy from a government which is instead hell-bent on the corporate asset stripping of the nation. Today's figures demonstrate quite clearly that the UK is relying on services and consumption, precisely at the moment households have the least money to spend. There can be no recovery in these circumstances. In fact, the only outcome of such a policy can be more unemployment, more high-quality jobs replaced by shelf stacking and coffee serving, reduced tax income and more government debt. Perhaps a more serious approach might be possible if the government were to halt its massive privatisation scheme and bring our basic economic infrastructure back into public ownership. A massive investment using national credit as a source of finance might not just generate large numbers of skilled jobs in a variety of industries and kickstart the real economy back into life. Assuming they also have the guts to deal with the banks, of course. In Europe, the debt bubble for Eurozone countries has increased in size to a massive 8.2 trillion euros. This figure is now so large that the fact that it is the banks which are the problem is a fact which can no longer be ignored. As a result, the mainstream media is finally coming out and calling for restructuring of the banking sector. Does this mean a European Glass-Steagall Act? Well, no. Instead, Peter Elrich, writing in the Financial Times Deutschland, wrote an article entitled, "Finally, move ahead to the core of the crisis. The Eurozone needs a common system to support and restructure banks," in which he calls for yet another European bailout fund for restructuring, which would put so-called toxic assets in a bad bank. In a huge twist of logic, this new bailout fund to refinance the bank would be financed by the banks. The whole operation would be placed inside the so-called European Stability Mechanism, which is Europe's permanent bailout fund, which is intended to replace the European Financial Stability Mechanism, which is Europe's temporary bailout fund, both of which run in parallel with the European Financial Stability Facility, which is a Europe special purpose bailout fund. This approach is presented as an alternative to the direct pumping of money into the bank through the ESFS and the ESM, which is the preferred option for the IMF's Christine Lagarde. Lagarde feels such direct bailouts would be a step towards a better and stronger Europe. George Osborne's support for Christine Lagarde's IMF increased this week with a new £10 billion bung for her organisation. That comes despite yet another unexpected economic event, the widening of the government budget deficit in March. Osborne borrowed £18.2 billion, which is the largest amount borrowed since November 2010. In reality, the situation is much worse because that figure excludes borrowing which is used to support the banks, including, perhaps, that £10 billion bung for Christine. As an aside, we found it amusing to compare the mainstream headlines on this story. Bloomberg said, "Osborne under pressure as budget deficit widens," whilst the Guardian said, "UK government meets borrowing target for financial year." Meanwhile, Europe's most bankrupt bank, Rothschild Inter Alpha Group Banco Santander, has announced it is aiming to strengthen its solvency, whatever that means, by selling off a huge chunk of its Mexican unit in an IPO. It is expected that Santander will raise somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. The deal is the latest in a string of similar sell-offs in other Latin American subsidiaries, and the billions raised are being used to try to cover the record high losses it is facing in southern Europe. On Wednesday, Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy announced that the Spanish government is to outlaw any cash transaction that exceeds €2,500. This move by the Spanish government is an alleged measure to prevent fraud and tax evasion. Those caught making transactions above the legislated €2,500 will be fined up to 25% of the surplus transaction. This move by the Spanish government may be seen as a desperate attempt to claw back money from the public amid harsh austerity measures that have already seen services cut by €27 billion, as well as funds to the health department being cut by €10 billion. Madrid's regional prime minister, Esperanza Aguirre, who belongs to Rajoy's Conservative People's Party, has called for the devolution of Spain's 17 autonomous regions into one centralised government, due to the pressure being put on the country's funds caused by the overlapping of the various administrative obligations. Rajoy said that he wasn't considering such a move, but has announced strict spending limits which are aimed at bringing the regional government spending under control, suggesting that responsibility of the country's deficit falls at the feet of the regional governments. Aguirre's suggestion of a central reshake-up of the regional governments was supported by an editorial in the Daily El Mundo. Barclaycard Visa has announced that its cardholders will be able to make contactless payments of up to £15 by means of a sticker called a pay tag on the back of their mobile phones. Barclaycard believes the mobile phone has become the most essential thing to have about your person at all times, so have chosen this method because you won't leave home without it. Whilst many will think that a cashless society would be a marvellous thing, built on the back of ease and convenience, we would urge people to give this approach much more consideration. We must remind ourselves that convenience has rarely served us, and has often blindly led us down a path that sees us relinquish part, or all of our liberty, such as the overextension of technology in our lives, which has seen us become ever dependent on machines, such as sat-navs, that have often led consumers down the most convenient route, only to find themselves in a marsh or river, or on a cliff top. And let's not forget credit cards themselves, a marvellously convenient way of paying which has helped slide millions of people into debt, who otherwise wouldn't be if they hadn't been given access to large sums of invisible money and instead only spent what they could earn. This move has been heralded as a means to reduce the threat of theft and robbery, but the argument has absolutely no merits. Whether a cashless society works by means of a card, a device or a chip is irrelevant. The new means will simply become the target of the thief, and if we are foolish enough to embed this new means into our body, then our bodies will become the target. A cashless society is simply a means by which the bank can increase their profits dramatically. Banks will no doubt take a slice of every single transaction that ever takes place, once it becomes mandatory that we have a bank account. It also means that banks will no longer have to supply ATMs, cash registers, or even the people that work behind them, as they will be able to streamline their workers further with the use of automated machines. As well as the full implementation of fiat currency, full control of currency opens us up to the reality that, in the future, governments and banks could refuse people access or even terminate their accounts, which would mean people would be unable to get vital services or even food and water. No fewer than 9 governments are introducing means to a cashless society, including Sweden, Canada, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, Spain, South Korea, the US, and of course the UK. The US has gone further than implementing policy and services to encourage a cashless society by declaring that anyone using cash should be suspected as being a terrorist, whilst failing to note that the supposed 9/11 terrorists used credit cards issued by a US agency. The Department for Homeland Security has recently released this video.
Here's your key, and the elevator is right behind you.
Here's what a credit card will do.
No credit card.
Terrorists and criminals do their best to cover their tracks.
Sir, if you will just give me one moment.
This may include paying in cash or using false identification.
Hang on a second. Let me call you back.
I'm sorry to bother you.
Suzanne?
I have this guest who wants to stay for a few weeks and wants to pay in advance in cash.
Well, cash is money last time I checked. What's the problem? Did you ask him for a credit card?
Yeah, I did. He said he doesn't have one. He doesn't use them.
No credit cards? How about an ID?
He gave me one. It just doesn't feel right.
Well, everyone's normal until they check into a hotel.
Yeah, I know.
Problem?
I guess it's not a problem. It's just weird. Okay, we have everything checked out then. That's for you. And I'll...
If your interaction with the patron feels odd, if that person appears nervous or anxious, refuses to show ID, if the ID seems to be altered, or if the guest insists on paying with cash for sums that are customarily charged and refuses to show a credit card, alert your manager or security personnel. This is suspicious behavior.
Did you ask him for a credit card?
Yeah, I did. He said he doesn't have one. He doesn't use them.
No credit cards?
I guess it's not a problem. It's just weird.
Did you ask him for a credit card?
Yeah, I did. He said he doesn't have one. He doesn't use them.
No credit cards?
I guess it's not a problem. It's just weird.
Former Cabinet Secretary Gus O'Donnell has refused to rule himself out of the running for the job of Governor of the Bank of England. He told BBC Radio 4's PM programme that the post will be advertised in due course, and I think between now and the time it is advertised, I will have to make up my mind on that question. But I certainly haven't come to a decision yet. I am very strongly of the opinion that when you think about how important someone is as a contender, you look at the betting odds, and betting odds don't make me favourite or even second favourite, he said. Under normal circumstances, that sentiment may well be correct. However, O'Donnell was, until he retired as Cabinet Secretary, headed up the government's behavioural insight team, bringing the common purpose agenda into the heart of the civil service. The new governor role will have significantly more power than that currently wielded by Mervyn King, once the Financial Services Bill is enacted. Montague Private Equity, a London-based finance company, has acquired the College of Law for an amount in the region of £200 million. The college, which has its origins in the Law Society, was a charitable organisation that provided bursaries, scholarships and grants to students wishing to study law at the college. The college will continue to provide these services, but not before Montague Private Equity has split the charity in two, in order to turn part of the operation into a for-profit company, while still being able to get funding from government enterprises such as the Big Society Capital, which has been specifically set up to fund the charity sector. The charity will get a helping hand in acquiring such funding, as Sir Tim Wilson, author of a recent Government Commission report on higher education, will be acting as non-executive director of the college's commercial board and will chair the Academic Audit and Standards Committee. Whilst getting help from the inside, the public should also consider the implications of a private equity firm buying not only a college, but a college that specifically teaches students law. Many of us are wising up to the fact that our good Lady Justice has been transformed into a profit monster, and now, with the reins of students being guided by a law college, now controlled by a company, it will be no wonder that the company will utilise this opportunity to make the law sector even more profitable. Few of our viewers will be surprised to know that Montague has already announced their intention to change the name of the charitable side of the organisation to the Legal Education Foundation. Whilst to the general public this may not seem significant, those of us who know the difference between lawful and legal will appreciate precisely the significance of this change in the name, since law is supposed to serve and protect us, and legal seems mainly to serve for making profit. This expanse into the education world is not an isolated case. Whilst we may be conned into thinking that these moves will provide more funding, we must endeavour to see past this rosy red poisoned apple that's now on offer. Whilst companies promise to provide more funding, we must understand the nature of companies. They are for making profit, first and foremost. That means utilising revenues and minimising costs, but also expanding customer bases. In schools, they will be able to sculpt children's minds as they take more control of the curriculum, and will have access to our children's data. By the time a child leaves education, companies will know everything about them, their habits, likes, hobbies and ambitions. Schools will become feeding grounds for market researchers and marketeers, while the facilities and teaching levels will be gradually cut back as companies seek to make greater profits. That is the nature of business. To reduce costs in any way, shape or form, even at the risk of cutting quality of service in order to maximise profits. The man-made global warming cult suffered another blow this week as Devon-based environmentalist James Lovelock, who is best known for proposing the Gaia hypothesis, told MSNBC that he regrets his previous alarmist statements about climate change. Lovelock told MSNBC that the problem is we don't know what the climate is doing. We thought we knew 20 years ago. That led to some alarmist books, mine included, because it looked clear-cut. But it hasn't happened. Referring to temperature, he said, "We were supposed to be halfway towards a frying world now. The world has not warmed up very much since the millennium. 12 years is a reasonable time. It has stayed almost constant, whereas it should have been rising. Carbon dioxide is rising, no question about that." This brings Lovelock broadly in line with other climate scientists, including MIT's Professor Richard Lindzen, who gave evidence to a seminar at the House of Commons in February this year. Held by the campaign to reconsider the climate change, Professor Lindzen said, "Stated briefly, I will simply try to clarify what the debate over climate change is really about. It most certainly is not about whether climate is changing. It always is. It's not about whether CO2 is increasing. It clearly is. It is not about whether the increase in CO2 by itself will lead to some warming. It should. The debate is simply over the matter of how much warming the increase in CO2 can lead to and the connection of such warming to the innumerable claims of catastrophes. The evidence is that the increase in CO2 will lead to very little warming, and that the connection of this minimal warming, or even significant warming, to the purported catastrophes is also minimal. The arguments on which the catastrophic claims are made are extremely weak, and commonly acknowledged as such. They are sometimes overtly dishonest." Yesterday in the Commons, Home Secretary Theresa May denied that the security services will be able to monitor emails in real time under her proposals for snooping on internet activities. Theresa May was answering questions from the Home Affairs Select Committee. She said, "The proposal that we have is very simple. To maintain the capability for the security services to access certain data on terrorists, criminals, and so on. Given that technology is evolving, we need to maintain that capability. There are new methods of communication, and we wish to be able to apply what has been there with previous communications. It is our intention to bring the capability up to date. There has been a lot written about what this will do. It will not be looking into emails in real time." However, when she was asked about whether or not it would be possible for GCHQ equipment connected to ISP networks would be able to decrypt encrypted traffic to social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter, she would not be drawn in. "I don't think it's appropriate for me to say. It's a technical detail, and I'm clear what the legislation will say on access," she said. Theresa May's comments will undoubtedly disappoint Sir David Ormond, former head of GCHQ. Ormond has written a report in collaboration with Demos, the Marxist think tank. In Demos's view, the government should consult further on how it intends to use any data it collects from social media sites in particular. They say that open internet that promotes the free exchange of ideas was an economic and public good and should be protected under any new regulation. An open internet protected by legislation is of course necessary if you want to spy on your population. Any attempt to close the internet down would reduce its usefulness as any intelligence gathering medium. On the 20th of March 2012, the mainstream media reported a 7.9 earthquake in the state of Chiapas, Mexico. No lives were lost, though the city experienced damage and a period of chaos unsettled the residents. What the mainstream media failed to report is that miraculously the government was preparing for an earthquake drill at precisely the same time of the earthquake, at approximately the same magnitude, prompting many people worldwide to consider the possibility that the earthquake was man-made. Prior to the earthquake, on the 2nd of March, Daniel Coati, the coordinator of supervision and regional evaluation of the Institute of Civil Defense for the Integral Handling of Risks, in the state, announced that there would be a simulation carried out to determine the response of the population during an emergency. He said, "Although in the state of Chiapas the seismic activity overcomes 554 telluric movements, gentle simulation will not have anything in common with latent threat, but to create the civil defense culture in the population." An interesting comment. The day before, on the 19th, a video was released, further reminding the population that the proposed exercise would be carried out at 12 p.m. local time, simulating a 7.8 earthquake. How strange then that a real earthquake of the same approximate magnitude would then take place, reported by the National Seismological Service to be of 7.8 on the Richter scale at precisely 12:03 p.m. And finally, despite the Daily Mail's scaremongering story, the FBI will not be shutting the internet down on the 9th of July. The uninformed article, written by Rob Waugh, implies that the FBI intends to switch off internet access to hundreds of thousands of people who have computers infected by the DNS changer Trojan. In fact, the FBI have been rather generously helping keep these computers online by mimicking the infrastructure of the virus writers. I say generously because I am quite sure the FBI would not have been gathering internet usage data while they have been providing this very generous service. You can find out if your machine has been infected by this Trojan and to get advice about how to remove it if you have it at dcwg.org. I'm Malcolm Massey, and this has been the UK Column News. Thank you for watching.